One of the most shocking and mysterious cases in Canadian history remained unsolved for nearly half a century. The tragic story of Sharron Prior captivated the nation, as a brutal crime shattered a family's world and left countless questions unanswered. Despite many losing hope of ever discovering the truth, Sharon's parents never gave up their fight for justice. For decades, they held on to the hope that one day their daughter's murderer would be found and held accountable. And finally, after years of heartache, advances in forensic science and modern technology brought them closer to the truth than ever before. This is the story of Sharron Prior, a tale of loss, perseverance, and a long-awaited path to justice. Sharron Prior was born in the winter of 1959 in Montreal, a city known for its picturesque landscapes and vibrant culture. Her mother, originally from Great Britain, had immigrated to Canada as a young girl, where she eventually met her future husband, George. A dedicated member of the Canadian Army, George's service to his country shaped much of their family's life. The two fell in love and quickly married, settling down to start a family. Sharon was their first child, born into a loving household filled with hope and promise for the future. From a young age, Sharon exhibited a kind and compassionate nature that would define much of who she was. She had a natural instinct to care for those in need, whether it was a person or an animal. A lover of all creatures, she often brought home stray cats and dogs, particularly those that were sick or injured. She would nurse them back to health, showering them with love and attention, and then work to find them new homes. This deep compassion for animals inspired Sharon to dream of becoming a veterinarian, a path that she seemed destined to follow. Beyond her love for animals, Sharon was a bright and active child who enjoyed many hobbies and activities. She had a passion for sports, frequently participating in hockey, where she demonstrated both skill and enthusiasm. Her artistic side shone through in her dedication to art classes, where she would create drawings and crafts that displayed her creativity. Sharon also took lessons in needlework, honing a skill that required patience and care, two qualities she embodied in every aspect of her life. As she grew older, Sharon's potential only seemed to increase. Bright, independent, and mature beyond her years, she had a promising future filled with opportunities. She was loved by her family and admired by her friends, all of whom saw her as someone destined for a life full of accomplishments and happiness. By 1975, Sharron Prior was a lively 16-year-old, balancing the typical joys and challenges of teenage life. She loved trendy clothes, music, and had a passion for staying current with the styles of the time. Despite her growing independence, Sharon was grounded by a strong, supportive family who shared close bonds and cherished their time together. Her parents encouraged her dreams and took pride in their daughter, who had grown into a responsible, thoughtful young woman. In addition to her family, Sharon's world was brightened by her relationship with John, a boy who had admired her since the fourth grade. Over time, their friendship blossomed into a sincere, young love. Seeing the genuine care and respect between them, Sharon's family supported their relationship wholeheartedly. They often spent time together, hanging out with friends, enjoying each other's company, and creating memories as any teenage couple would. March 29, 1975 was supposed to be an ordinary Saturday, yet one that held excitement as the family prepared for the upcoming Easter holiday. That morning, Sharon woke up and joined her mother in finalizing preparations for the celebration. She spent most of the day painting Easter eggs, a family tradition, while also helping her mother put away groceries and gifts. Her mother's boyfriend, Doug, was also there, adding to the holiday spirit as they prepared for a small family gathering. Later that evening, Sharon planned to meet up with friends at a local pizzeria called Marina's, a place they often gathered. As the time to leave approached, Sharon put on her favorite suede jacket and got ready to step out. It was around 6:30 when she finally left her house, accompanied briefly by a neighbor before going separate ways. Sharon's plan was simple: enjoy a fun evening with friends and then return home to her family, as she had done countless times before. But this time, she would not make it to the pizzeria, marking the beginning of a tragedy that would forever change the lives of those who loved her. On the evening of March 29, 1975, Sharon left her house around 6:30, excited to meet her friends at the local pizzeria. marinas. She wore her favorite suede jacket, said her goodbyes, and headed out alone into the evening. However, Sharon never made it to the pizzeria. As the minutes turned to hours, her friends began to worry when she failed to arrive at their usual meeting spot. Meanwhile, back at home, Sharon's mother grew anxious as the evening wore on and her daughter still hadn't returned. She tried to reassure herself that Sharon was simply spending extra time with her friends or John, knowing how close the group was. But as the night progressed and there was still no sign of Sharon, her mother's unease quickly turned to concern. She reached out to John, hoping to hear that Sharon was safe with him. To her dismay, neither John nor any of Sharon's friends had seen or heard from her since she left her house that evening. The absence of any word from Sharon was unsettling. It was completely unlike the punctual and responsible girl to not return home on time or notify someone of her whereabouts, deepening the growing fear that something terrible had happened. When it became apparent that Sharron Prior was missing, a wave of panic and urgency swept through her family and friends. By the next morning, the concern escalated into immediate action. Sharon's mother, struggling to understand her daughter's sudden disappearance, reached out to neighbors, friends, and anyone who might have seen Sharon the night before. With no clear leads and no information to ease their fears, Sharon's family knew they needed help. They promptly went to the police to report her as missing, and soon a large-scale search effort was underway. Word of Sharon's disappearance quickly spread through the community. Hundreds of people, both locals and volunteers from nearby areas, joined in to assist with the search. Law enforcement officers canvassed the neighborhood and its surroundings, hoping to find any trace of the young girl. Volunteers searched parks, alleyways, and abandoned areas, calling out Sharon's name and hoping to hear her voice in response. Flyers were distributed, and her description, 16 years old with long brown hair, wearing her favorite suede jacket, was plastered all over the city. As the hours stretched into days, the hopeful search for a missing teenager began to turn into a desperate race against time. As the days dragged on, the hope of finding Sharon safe and sound began to diminish. There were no sightings, no new leads, and every possible clue seemed to lead to a dead end. It was clear to everyone involved that something was terribly wrong. The Prior family, overwhelmed with fear and anxiety, could only wait and pray that their beloved daughter would be found. However, the grim reality began to set in. Sharon was not simply lost. Something much darker had happened. Several days after her disappearance on April 1st, the devastating news came. Sharon's body was discovered in a wooded area in Longueuil, an industrial neighborhood not far from her home. She was found brutally murdered, lying face down on the ground, naked from the waist down. The scene was horrifying, and the violent nature of her death shattered any remaining hope that she would be found alive. The joyful, compassionate girl who had dreamed of becoming a veterinarian was gone, and the shocking tragedy left her family and community in disbelief and deep sorrow. An autopsy was quickly ordered to determine the full extent of the crime and the circumstances leading to Sharon's death. What emerged was a haunting picture of her final hours. It was evident that Sharon had suffered immensely. The autopsy revealed that she had been held captive for several days, during which she was subjected to horrific abuse and torture. The physical evidence pointed to brutal sexual assault, and signs of strangulation were found on her neck. Additionally, multiple injuries across her body suggested that she had been beaten, and her ribs had been crushed, evidence of extreme violence and cruelty. The forensic examination concluded that she had died just hours before her body was discovered, meaning she had been kept alive for several days after her abduction. The nature of Sharon's murder stunned the detectives, and the sheer brutality of the crime was nearly unfathomable. The search for her killer began immediately, as the police worked tirelessly to piece together the evidence and track down any possible suspects. The scene where Sharon's body was found was meticulously examined, and several clues were discovered. Tire tracks were found nearby, suggesting that the murderer may have driven to the secluded spot to dispose of her body. A faint trail of blood droplets led from where the car had been to where Sharon was found, indicating that she had been transported from one location to another. Among the personal items found at the scene, one piece of evidence stood out: a small receipt for a jacket that Sharon was supposed to pick up. This jacket, a symbol of her membership in a local sports association, had special meaning to Sharon. For her disappearance, she had eagerly anticipated collecting the jacket as a reward for her achievements. However, when she arrived at the association to retrieve it, she was disappointed to find that they didn't have one in her size. Though Sharon never received the jacket, the receipt remained in her possession, a reminder of her determination and excitement about earning it. The presence of this receipt at the crime scene added another layer to the mystery. It confirmed that Sharon had been planning to collect the jacket the day she went missing, further solidifying the timeline of events leading up to her abduction. The police hoped that this clue, along with the other evidence, might provide the necessary breakthrough to solve the case and bring her killer to justice. Despite the urgency of the investigation, progress was slow. In the 1970s, forensic science was limited compared to modern standards, making it difficult to extract DNA or other biological evidence from the crime scene. Detectives were left to rely primarily on witness statements, circumstantial evidence, and conventional investigative techniques to identify a suspect. The community was on edge, fearful that a dangerous predator was still lurking among them. The fact that Sharon had been abducted in what seemed like a safe neighborhood and then brutally murdered shook the sense of security for everyone living in the area. As the investigation dragged on, Sharon's family was left to grapple with their overwhelming grief and heartbreak. The young girl who had brought so much light into their lives was taken away in the most violent way imaginable, and the pain of losing her was almost unbearable. The search for answers and justice consumed them, and they were determined to see their daughter's killer caught and punished. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the case remained unsolved, leaving the family and the community to wonder who could have committed such a horrific act and when, or if, they would ever find peace. Sharon's murder would remain a haunting mystery for decades, a case that seemed destined to go cold. It was only the relentless pursuit of her family and the eventual advancements in forensic technology that would breathe new life into the investigation, offering a glimmer of hope that justice would one day be served. But in those early days following her disappearance and tragic death, the grief and fear were overwhelming, and the unanswered questions seemed endless. In the wake of Sharron Prior's murder, investigators noted striking similarities to other local crimes, particularly the brutal killings of Norma O'Brien and Debbie Fisher. Norma, a 12-year-old girl, had been murdered in July 1974. She vanished while on her way home from a local swimming pool, only to be found brutally assaulted and killed. Just months later, in June 1975, 14-year-old Debbie Fisher met a similar fate. She was last seen riding her red bicycle home but never made it. The following May, her body was found in a wooded area. She had been bludgeoned to death, though she was not sexually assaulted. Given the brutal nature of these crimes and the proximity of their occurrences, law enforcement began exploring the possibility of a serial killer preying on young girls in the area. However, Debbie Fisher's case took a different turn when a 17-year-old boy was arrested and confessed to her murder. Unlike Sharon's and Norma's cases, this crime was a result of a chance encounter, where the young man lured Debbie closer before attacking her. The suspect's capture brought some resolution to Debbie's family, yet the connections between these crimes and the possibility of a serial offender in Sharon's case remained a terrifying theory for police and the public alike. After the initial flurry of activity following Sharron Prior's murder, the investigation began to stagnate. Despite the police's best efforts to gather evidence from the crime scene and conduct countless interviews with potential suspects and witnesses, no concrete lead emerged. For over a year, detectives pored over every detail, hoping to find the crucial clue that would break the case. But every potential lead turned into a dead end, and the lack of reliable forensic technology at the time made it difficult to piece together a clear picture of the events that transpired. Amid this period of uncertainty, Sharon's mother remained relentless in her pursuit of justice. She refused to let her daughter's case fade away into obscurity, tirelessly searching for any new information that might shed light on the killer's identity. She engaged the community, spoke with neighbors, and kept the memory of Sharon alive, hoping that any small detail might eventually help solve the mystery of her daughter's death. Throughout the investigation, both police and Sharon's family strongly believed that the attacker could have been a local resident, someone who was familiar with the area and its routines. The belief that the perpetrator was hiding in plain sight, possibly within their own community, haunted those who lived nearby, creating a sense of fear and suspicion that would linger for years to come. As the investigation into Sharron Prior's murder struggled to gain traction, law enforcement began to form theories about the potential profile of her killer. Given the brutality of the crime and its calculated nature, investigators speculated that the perpetrator might be a young local man with a troubling history of abusive or violent behavior. Someone familiar with the area would have known where to approach Sharon without drawing attention and how to discreetly dispose of evidence. This led police to focus on individuals within the neighborhood who had past criminal records, especially those with offenses related to assault or violence. Moreover, as they explored connections to other unsolved cases in the vicinity, detectives began to consider the possibility of a serial killer. The recurring pattern in these cases pointed to an offender who had a preference for control and domination, often escalating to violence and torture. The killer appeared to target young girls, abducting them from familiar environments before subjecting them to brutal abuse. This consistent modus operandi, focused on manipulation, violence, and ultimately murder, suggested a predator who carefully chose victims and carried out the attacks with a chilling level of premeditation. The similarities in the cases of other local murders, such as the attacks on Norma O'Brien and later Tammy Leakey, highlighted a disturbing pattern. Each victim was young, abducted near their home, and subjected to brutal physical abuse. The mounting parallels in how the crimes were executed raised strong suspicions that they were connected and orchestrated by the same individual or group. The fear of a serial offender hiding within the community loomed over the neighborhood, casting suspicion on everyone and driving an intense manhunt for someone who seemed to strike without warning and leave little trace behind. Not long after Sharron Prior's tragic death, another brutal case shook the community and heightened fears of a serial predator. Tammy Leakey, a young girl who lived in the same area, was discovered barely alive after a violent attack. She had suffered severe injuries, and despite the desperate efforts of medical professionals, Tammy succumbed to her wounds shortly after being found. The nature of her assault bore eerie similarities to Sharon's murder. Both victims were young girls abducted from their neighborhoods, subjected to extreme physical abuse, and left to die in secluded areas. Tammy's case reinforced law enforcement's growing theory that a serial offender was operating in the area, targeting young girls in a similar manner. The brutality of the assault, the method of abduction, and the apparent desire to inflict suffering all mirrored the patterns seen in Sharon's case. Like Sharon, Tammy showed signs of having been held captive before her death, suggesting that the perpetrator took time to exert power and control over the victims. The close proximity of the attacks, along with the striking similarities, led investigators to believe they were looking for a single individual, or potentially a small group, responsible for both Tammy's and Sharon's murders. The escalating violence and repeated targeting of young girls created an urgent need to apprehend the killer. But without definitive forensic evidence or eyewitness accounts, the case remained painfully open-ended, leaving law enforcement struggling to find the predator before another innocent life could be taken. In the years following Sharron Prior's murder, her mother never stopped fighting for justice, holding on to the hope that her daughter's killer would one day be found. As time passed and technology advanced, she became increasingly determined to see the case reopened. In 2000, more than 25 years after Sharon's murder, she successfully pushed law enforcement to re-examine the evidence using modern forensic techniques. Thanks to advancements in forensic science, investigators were able to reanalyze the evidence collected from the crime scene, this time focusing on extracting any possible DNA samples. Careful examination of Sharon's clothing and other items revealed a potential DNA sample from the suspect, an invaluable clue that had not been accessible during the initial investigation. This development breathed new life into the cold case, as DNA analysis now held the promise of identifying Sharon's killer and finally bringing justice. However, the breakthrough wasn't as conclusive as hoped. When the newly extracted DNA profile was run through the existing database, no matches were found, indicating that the suspect was either never apprehended for another crime or their DNA had not been recorded. Despite this, Sharon's mother remained hopeful. The preserved DNA sample meant that one day, with further advancements in technology or the expansion of the DNA database, a definitive match could be found, offering a potential resolution to the long unsolved case. The search for justice continued, but now there was a glimmer of hope, a genetic link that could eventually lead to the identity of Sharon's murderer. As the investigation into Sharon Prior's murder stretched across decades, one name eventually surfaced as a potential suspect: Patrick French. Known to law enforcement as a dangerous criminal with a violent past, French had a reputation that made him an immediate person of interest. Several reports surfaced suggesting that French had allegedly boasted about his involvement in Sharon's murder, heightening suspicion. However, before any concrete evidence could be gathered against him, Patrick French met an untimely death during a gang-related altercation, taking any potential secrets with him. This left investigators with a dead suspect and many unanswered questions, frustrating Sharon's family and law enforcement alike. In a renewed effort to find justice, Sharon's family turned to the media, seeking to reignite public interest in the case. Her mother participated in TV shows, interviews, and documentaries, sharing the story of Sharon's life and tragic death, and criticizing the lack of progress in the investigation. This media attention not only kept Sharon's memory alive, but also pressured law enforcement to continue pursuing new leads. Public interest led to new calls for the case to be solved, and this sustained awareness played a crucial role in driving the investigation forward. A pivotal moment came in 2010 when technological advancements in forensic science finally provided a breakthrough. The DNA sample previously extracted from the crime scene was retested and matched with Franklin Roman, a man with a dark and violent history. Roman's DNA profile linked him directly to the crime, conclusively proving his involvement in Sharon's abduction and murder. This revelation marked the end of a decades-long mystery, finally offering Sharon's family the closure they had fought so hard to obtain. The journey to find justice for Sharron Prior was one marked by heartbreak, perseverance, and hope. For decades, her family carried the weight of an unsolved murder, never giving up on the dream of finding her killer. The confirmation of Franklin Roman's guilt after so many years represented not only a victory for Sharon's family, but also a triumph of forensic science, technology, and unrelenting determination. Sharon's story highlights the impact of violent crime on families and communities, and the tireless fight to hold perpetrators accountable. We invite you to share your thoughts on Sharon's story and the long road to justice in the comments below. Thank you for watching this documentary and for helping to keep Sharon's memory alive. Please take care and join us next time as we continue to explore the compelling and emotional stories of those impacted by true crime.